When I wrote about what I'm going to talk about today in my book, the story behind Too Much Punch for Judy, I entitled the whole chapter I devoted to this subject, Too Much Punch for Judy, Stranger Than Fiction. And certainly I could never ever have written what happened 10 years after Judy, was involved in the car accident, was driving the car along the road that killed her sister. I start the chapter off by saying, Tony mixed in social circles verging on celebrity, a world away from my teacher world. Hers seemed a more exciting world than mine. Her boyfriend at the time was the roadie for Chaz and Dave. Jo, her sister, had worked for an entertainment agency, so she mixed with the likes of famous people that I were only kind of fantasy people to me. And shortly after I left Epping, she became involved in an emotional relationship and a marriage with Steve Marriott, who by any standards was a very, very famous rock star. He'd played in the Small Faces. He was the singer in Small Faces. He'd been the singer for Humble Pie with Steve Frampton, who played with David Bowie. He was a friend of David Bowie. He performed as the Artful Dodger in Oliver when he was a little boy. He was a major celebrity. Too Much Punch for Judy at this point was touring with Ape Theatre Company. It was a very, very successful touring production here in Scotland and in New Zealand. It was doing incredibly well, and actors from it were doing very well. It was like a little cottage industry for TIE performers, theatre and education performers. And suddenly, something rocked Tony's world. Steve Marriott died in a house fire, and she wasn't with him. Again, much more detail in the book about this, but that wasn't the big event that changed the path of Too Much Punch for Judy irrevocably. And on the 11th of October, 1993, in the evening, I received a phone call from Chris Caton, who was the policeman involved in Too Much Punch for Judy, to let me know before it was released to the world that tragically a young girl, Penny Jessup, had been killed in a drink drive accident. She was not drunk, but the driver of the car was drunk and definitely under the influence of drugs as well, was Tony Marriott. I imagined all sorts of things. I'd imagined one of the cast being involved in a drink driving accident, and thought how awful that would be for the play. I had never considered that this event could happen again, and particularly on the same stretch of road. In my diary on that night, I've just shown you the real one, but in the book I show the diary, I've said, what must she have been thinking? So this was written on that day. What must she have been thinking? How could she have drunk anything before driving her car after what happened to her sister and after all she'd said in Too Much Punch for Judy, which has now been so widely reported? Perhaps this was not the first time she has driven since Jo's death. I wonder how, when and why she changed her mind. This new situation must have brought back horrible memories for her of Jo, let alone for the family who were having to deal with the suffering of losing a girl who had done nothing wrong. How will her involvement in the play affect the judges and jury's view? The law should be zero limit to avoid any blurred edges. Oh, it was just inconceivable that such a thing could happen. There were many conversations. I spoke to Penny's family afterwards. There was some controversy about the way in which the royalties were being paid, which was corrected very, very quickly. And I go into detail in that in the book. But when I spoke to road safety officers, their reaction was, once you have been convicted of drinking and driving, you are, statistically, more likely to offend again, more so than anyone who has never done so. I have to say, I wasn't that keen on meeting up with Judy again. But before her trial, I did. And I was reminded in somewhere here, I've got what happened on that day. I was reminded of why I'd liked her in the first place, in those first interviews. She was open, she was frank, she was devastated. Her life had been turned upside down. I can remember her saying, the second half of my life I've got to make better than how the first half has gone. And I do hope she has. I lost contact with her after these events. One of the reasons I had to go and see her was to see whether she was happy for the play to continue. I was fully expecting her to say no, but hats off to her. She said, I did something wrong. The world's prepared to see, to judge, and I need something good to come out of it. She repeated those words. I didn't go to her house with a tape recorder. She offered me an interview. She said, I want to talk because I'm sure you're going to use this in the play. Little piece of paper we had there. These were the notes I took. Tony, she recognises the inability to cope with the problems of her life has led to someone else suffering. I had nothing to live for, and I'm still here. She had everything, and she's gone. You'll have to ask God about that one. She gave me quotes that I could use in a section that was added to the play. The whole situation went to court. It appeared in national newspapers. There's Tony. She was sentenced to 5 years in jail and served that sentence. I was involved in newspaper interviews a little bit, and it gave the play an opportunity for the workshop to develop significantly. Tragically, no one ever would have wanted this, but it happened, and as I say in the book, life is stranger than fiction. I could never have written this as an epilogue to the play, but it happened. I really don't know what to add, and I've been concerned about whether even doing this as an episode on this YouTube thing sensationalizes it. I hope it hasn't. It was the biggest tragedy that one could ever imagine happening, and my heart goes out both to Penny's family, the Jessup family, who lived in North Weald and had to see her driving every now and then back and forth after the killing had happened. And my heart also goes out to Tony, who, after she'd been to prison, had to get on with the rest of her life. And I wish everyone the best.